Neal is a cybersecurity expert who has spent time in the U.S. Air Force working for Cyber Command. He has also worked for multiple Fortune 100 brands and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Currently, he is leading a global security operations transformation program and consulting through his company, Root Access Protection. Jeff is a named account manager with VMware Carbon Black. He has more than 30 years experience in the technology and cybersecurity sectors, helping clients around the world achieve first-class security protocols. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
So I want to jump right in. First, we want to talk about AWS, specifically an AWS coin mining attack. Anthony Randoza tweeted earlier this week that they spotted a new AWS coin mining attack and that had some interesting observations. One, that the attacker had root access. The bot framework was written in Golang, and the attackers brought their own SSH keys. Neal, what have you learned about the attack so far?
I think less about learning about this attack, more so just scary in terms of some of the things that this attack has highlighted, right? I mean, I think for years we've been doing things in the cloud, and we've done some amazing things in AWS. I think having cloud infrastructure like AWS and Azure has given us a lot of flexibility to stand things up and spend things down, and be really flexible in our IT deployments and whatnot. One of the things I think we might have potentially failed at as we've kind of been more agile and been more aggressive in pushing into that space is we may have potentially neglected the value of trying to bring over some of the traditional security things that we've tried to do on premise and focus them in on the cloud. And I think this is an example. This is a scary example of where something as simple as poor access controls around your AWS secrets can result in a pretty hefty bill from AWS at the end of the day. I think they said that they stood up about 10 C5 extra large EC2 instances to do coin miner software. So in this case, the attackers were absolutely not even worried about being stealthy. This was a bot that was simply geared towards how long can I get in there and get things spun up and try to mine as much cryptocurrency as humanly possible. I think causes a problem from a cloud architecture, a standards, and a visibility perspective.
It's kind of interesting on the AWS side because you see these attacks come through, and the impact is huge financially, right? But my first question comes to, where did it come from? How did they get access to begin with? Could that have been leveraged for something even worse than this? I mean, this was a big impact, obviously, but if you've got unfettered access, root access to an AWS account at a large instance, it could be catastrophically worse.
But I think to your first question, right, which is like, how do they get access? I think we go back to just software repositories and things like that. I mean, GitHub is massive out there, and there's tons of scripts that are out there and available, and there's tons of documentation and examples whereby people inadvertently upload their source code to GitHub, and inside that source code has got usernames and passwords, it's got AWS keys, it's got all sorts of information that's out there. But I mean, that's only one vector. I think, when you think about other ways that people upload data that's out there, I mean, you think about like Stack Overflow, right? If there's any developers on the podcast that are familiar with Stack Overflow, right, where you go in there and you ask for, suggestions and, how do you do certain code examples and things like that, there's people who have been known to put stuff on Stack Overflow that they weren't supposed to. And so, I think it gets back to, because we've allowed our agile development folks to kind of go outside of their on-premise control infrastructure for that. We've also stopped focusing on some of the normal things that we would do, both from a data security perspective as well as a baseline configuration perspective to lock down those instances. I think what's even more scary for me is that because we've ignored the cloud, and I say that knowing that that's probably going to trigger some folks who hear that, there's a lack of visibility, there's a lack of baseline configuration, there's a lack of control in the name of being agile and trying to hit that bottom line that, I think it's low hanging fruit for an attacker.
Yeah, you mentioned something that just kind of triggers my thought. There's a quote in Jurassic Park, and I'm going to absolutely butcher it, right? Because I am not that guy that can can remember quotes for the life of me. But the mathematician guy, whoever he was, talks about this. We got all caught up on whether
Yeah.
we could do something
Yeah.
and never thought should we. And the whole idea of agile is, hey, collaborate, work with your peers, and work with people that you don't necessarily know, and that opens the door to some great speed to market kind of stuff. But it obliterates what you stand for, Neal, and what I've been preaching as a security evangelist for the last number of years. Should you?
Well, but I think this, but you hit, we can keep pulling on that thread just a little bit there, because what this really boils down to is, we have failed as an industry because we continue to tell people no. And I had a great CISO that I worked for a
And they
really
don't
long
like
time.
that. They don't like hearing
They don't like that very
ever.
much at all. But I'm gonna give props to a CISO that I had a long time ago, Bobby Ford, when I worked for him, and he had a fantastic saying, right, which was, enable the business to take risk. And I think that we've been so many years, both IT before cybersecurity was really mainstream, and then, since cybersecurity has been pretty mainstream, we've been known as the no organization, and so nobody wants to talk to us anymore about cybersecurity, and so as a result, we don't get lumped into that bucket of being agile and being able to be equated to speed to market, and I think that helps lend to these types of oversights by these types of situations.
Well, I think it begs the question of, what is the right amount of cloud, right? You push to the cloud because it's faster. You push to the cloud because you can manage costs better. Um, but unless you're talking about risk, which I would argue that a lot of the developers and the business people that are only looking at the profit side of the house of, I can sell more, I can bring it to market faster, I can open the doors from a marketing perspective to totally new groups of people. And then all of a sudden you're left with this, oh yeah, AWS just got hacked, and they had unfettered access, and everything that we were costing out in our business model for business growth just went to pay our AWS bill because it's been coin mining for the last 3 months. You know,
but but I mean, well and good, right? But we still haven't addressed the real issue, right? So I don't know if you've ever encountered this, right? When you talk to people, they always ask you, "Well, is the cloud secure?" Right? I think the short answer to that is it's that's a slightly cynical approach. I would say that it's as secure as any other IT system that you put the effort into behind to secure it, and whether that's applying the same discipline and standards that you've ever applied internally, then I think the cloud can be secure. What's missing is cybersecurity hasn't adopted the agility that agile AWS developers have in terms of trying to go along with them in that journey to secure the cloud.
So we're talking about the cloud right now, but I'm wondering if we can expand that conversation to security issues that happen off premises. So, CIOs and CISOs are worried right now about all the security problems that come with a work from home environment that they weren't anticipating. So, Neal and Jeff, I'm hoping you can kind of expand this conversation to the worries that CISOs and CIOs have when they're looking at all of these probable misconfigurations in almost any kind of network because of this quick transition to a work from home environment.
Yeah, I think kind of key to something I presented this morning, right? Where you kind of mentioned it earlier when we talked about visibility, right? I think visibility is really kind of key to this, and whether we're talking about the cloud or whether we're talking about to your point the current pandemic situation, and trying to provide organizations with a more holistic visibility. I think the good example of that I've used, right, is for years and years, is since the mobile and the digital age has really kind of come up, we've talked about how the perimeter of the network has been expanded because of something as simple as a mobile phone, and because of the fact that you can get email and data and things like that on a mobile device. Your boundary is no longer the four walls of your office building. It's now been extended to wherever you take your phone to. I think that we've notionally accepted that as cybersecurity folks and infosec professionals for years, but then I think when we get hit with this pandemic, that really gets amplified, just because for folks who may not have necessarily had cell phone or mobile access to their corporate networks, now 70 to 80 to 90% of the population that's out there is doing literally everything, remote, working from home. And so now the boundaries of your network have really grown, to literally everybody's house and maybe Starbucks or wherever they happen to be working. And so unified visibility is massive in that, and we struggle with that. I think you also struggle with organizations who have been thrust into trying to fix, or create in some cases, infrastructure setups that support a massively mobile workforce, and whether that becomes, I've heard stories from folks of mine that are still in the service, right, where even like the one of the branches of the Department of Defense has struggled to get their VPN infrastructure up to be able to support all the people who would work from home on a DoD perspective. And you got anywhere from people accessing resources via remote desktop to Citrix environments failing because they can't handle enough connections because they don't have the right VPN concentrators. I mean, just people who have just been thrust into, how do I protect my data when everybody at home can access it? And then, oh, by the way, my infrastructure isn't patched, updated, resilient enough to be able to handle the influx of connections. I know that's not really an answer to the problem, but I think it's
the 90s called and they want their security architecture back.
100%.
We're facing a totally brand new problem with forks and knives. It's like, this is not the tool I need to get the visibility. You're talking about a totally different set of tools that an organization already has in their environment. They move to the cloud and say, okay, I need to see what's going on, gain that visibility, gain that control, understand my vulnerabilities, stop those vulnerabilities. And how can I tell the business that I've de-risked their environment if I don't have the tool sets to do it? And so, I mean, I think it absolutely starts with the connection between visibility, which is a foundational piece, and vulnerabilities to control capabilities. And if you don't have any one of those things, you're not able to secure the cloud because the perimeter doesn't exist anymore.
No, but I think also, like, I think the only thing I would tweak about that statement, Jeff, right, is I think you have to identify the root cause. And you know me, I'm huge about making sure that we identify the root cause so that we fix the real root of the problem. And I think the root cause of the problem is that culturally, enterprises and companies have said, well, it's fine, everybody works from on site anyway, so I don't really have to worry about the forks and knives that exist out there, because it's really only a handful of folks, maybe it's a third party here or there or something like that. And so the root cause
but hold on one second. What is the root cause, though? Because I think people have defined root cause incorrectly. From what I've seen, they've said, hey, root cause was this piece of malware, or it was this vulnerability. And I'd argue the root cause is the fact that you didn't have any visibility and no correlation between that and active threats, or any telemetry between cloud and on-prem, and how that connection ties into the overall kill chain back to actual root cause.
So I don't disagree with you, but I think you and I always seem to struggle with, who's the Jekyll and who's the Hyde in the conversation, right? Is, who represents, like, we can solve this through technology versus
which one's the good one?
How do we solve this? How do we solve this with soft skills, right? Because I think when I say root cause, I actually don't think technology is a root cause of this. I think culture is a root cause of this. I think culturally, right, we've said, well, it's good enough because everybody comes into the office. It's good enough because we've got four walls and we plug into the network and we've got a firewall, and everything else that's bad is on the outside of this. I think culturally, we've not prepared ourselves from a cybersecurity perspective, even with NIST frameworks and COVID and ISO 27001 and all these things that we try to put in place to quantify risk and identify risk and talk about risk and things like that. We haven't fixed the cultural problem, which says that if you're not taking cybersecurity seriously, if you're not taking cyber resiliency serious, if you're not taking visibility seriously, then when the pandemic happens, you're all of a sudden not prepared. And that's when you're realizing that you're fighting with forks and knives.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's too late.
Yeah. Absolutely, it's too late. That's what the if you looked at March and April, I don't know what you saw in your endeavors, but March and April was just pure chaos. Every CISO and CIO out there was trying to figure out
Exactly.
how do I get my remote workforce to work remotely, and every CISO's like, holy cow, my attack surface is just 10-folded or 20-folded.
All right, so we're going to move on to the next topic. So, Wired magazine came out with an article a couple days ago about a vulnerability in a certain piece of networking equipment from Seattle-based company F5 Networks, and I'm going to read directly from the article because I think it's very interesting. Last week, government agencies, including the United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team and Cyber Command, sounded the alarm on a particularly nasty vulnerability in a line of big IP products sold by F5. So this vulnerability was patched over the weekend. The alert was sent out on July 4th, and most companies have already patched the vulnerability. But Neal and Jeff, what I find interesting is a lot of companies may have already been too late in patching that vulnerability. So can you kind of talk about what Wired is calling a five alarm fire type vulnerability? I'm wondering if that's hyperbole, and if not, why is this such a huge security vulnerability?
I find, and I'll jump in here real quick because I think this is more pervasive than just F5, right? Any vulnerability that comes out and says, hey, we've got this issue, you got to go solve it. Well, you talk to any corporation, there is zero ability to go out and patch that in time. So you see some of these things that come out in the media. The reality is the hackers knew about this. The hacker community collaborates more than the white hat community, and they've already seen this vulnerability. And if they are learning about it for the first time, they know for a fact that they can go and attack any Fortune 100 company with this vulnerability before that company can go through their patch management cycle. The amount of time it takes for a company of any size to just go through the standard day-to-day process of approving a patch and implementing that patch after hours, because it can't affect business, mind you. It doesn't matter how vulnerable they are. If they bring down the business, then all hell breaks loose. And the reality is, I think, to your point earlier, Neal, this is a cultural problem of a five-alarm fire is not seen as a five-alarm fire because it's deemed security will get to it as soon as we can.
See, this is Jeff getting passionate about the business standing in the way of vulnerabilities. Like you'll see this as a common theme. The more vulnerabilities that we bring up is business. And with all due respect to Jeff, I know I say this poking at him. I know he doesn't truly feel like this deep down in his cybersecurity heart. Is Jeff believes in screw the business, right? If it's a 5-alarm vulnerability, then the business will survive more so than a hack attack. And I think that's an extreme, right? That I think, is hard for a lot of folks in InfoSec, especially at the CIO and the CISO level. It's we struggle with that because, the business does make money, right? And, it's not a matter of if you're going to get hacked, it's a matter of when you get hacked. And so do you play the roulette table? Do you roll those dice and decide like, can I wait 5 days to patch? Maybe I can wait 2 or 3 days to patch. Maybe maybe something else will stop that attack there. And I think that's that risk management approach that, is always really, really hard to gauge with a vulnerability like the F5 one. Now, I'm definitely not downplaying this F5 one. I think, from my perspective, we've complained for years that, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, they don't share with us, enough intelligence when it comes to actively exploited vulnerabilities, either by our own nation or by other nations that are out there. And so, yes, I actually take it pretty seriously when a somebody like the NSA comes out and says, yeah, you guys should patch this right now. You got to remember, that's the signals intelligence part of the United States military and government structure, right? They see everything, whether you believe in Snowden or not, whether you agree with him or not, it doesn't really matter, but they're seeing a lot of stuff. And so, if they tell you should patch right now, yeah, you're probably already owned, by it.
But Neal, you've worked at some very large companies and consulted for others. You know, how long is that patch cycle between notification to evaluate? All right, I just got notified this was a 5 alarm fire, but is it a 5 alarm fire to us? And what's the impact if we don't do it immediately? Okay, put it in play, schedule it, and put it out there. Like, what is that cycle timeline?
Cynically, it's how big the fire is underneath your butt. I mean, I've seen when WannaCry hit, there was an organization that I was working with when WannaCry hit. They got to 80% within 24 hours, and we're talking like 100, 117, 115,000, endpoints where they got to 80% in 24 hours, which was, which when you look at how vulnerability management was done outside of the fire underneath their butt, they couldn't get to 80% in 6 months, for
Yeah.
a critical vulnerability. So, I think this gets back to culturally is, everybody is great at responding to the largest fires underneath their butt, but they fail at building a program that allows them to do it in a repetitive, consistent fashion that meets the current challenges of the vulnerabilities. And I think what that really boils down to is, because we call it a 5 alarm fire, we create a culture that says it's okay that you didn't patch your criticals in 6 months because that wasn't a 5 alarm fire. However, this one you really have to patch, and so you see a lot of organizations move on it. You could almost look at this type of alerting, as a double-edged sword, right? Yes, we want to patch early. Yes, we want to try to get everybody patched as well. But then we just continue to foster that culture that says, we're okay leaving a critical vulnerability out there for 6 months. But yeah, for this one, you absolutely got to patch, in the next 24 hours. You're not wrong
But
on your patch.
so you communicated to the boards and senior levels. How do you get them to say that? Like, this is the part I struggle with. Of you've got a 5 alarm fire, but it's the boy that cried wolf over and over and over again, because literally you could say there's a 5 alarm fire in the world every single day, uh, from the perspective of security. So, which ones? How do you quickly determine which ones truly are, and then how do you communicate that to your leadership?
So I would challenge this back, right? Because there's always like the canned answers. Like if you brought another CISO on
Right.
here, if you brought if you brought somebody from the board on here, if you brought a CFO on here, right? They'd be like, well, we got to talk about risk and report return on investment, and what's the value of the tools and
It all comes back to money.
it
How
all comes
much
back
money
to
are we
money.
going to lose
Yeah, it
by
comes
doing this?
exactly. And so, we've had this conversation over the last couple of weeks, as we've been leading up to this podcast, right, is likelihood, right? And because we in the cybersecurity industry have a struggle and a hard time deciding what the likelihood is of an attack, when we get a notice like this from the NSA, like that's our key. That's like, man, the likelihood of this attack is actually probably like tomorrow. And as a matter of fact, I think as we were prepping to talk about this, I was watching Twitter over the course of the weekend as this was developing, right? And the Metasploit guys released an exploit for this for their Metasploit framework, and within hours of that code being uploaded to GitHub for Metasploit, the Internet Storm Center was reporting through their honeypots, active exploitation of that that exploit out there in the wild. And so we've determined likelihood based on the reputation of an organization like this that comes forward, but we failed at determining likelihood everywhere else.
So, Jeff, I want to kind of pick on something you said earlier, where you talking about everything is a 5 alarm fire. When you're talking to CISOs and CIOs, how do you talk about implementing a framework that is able to triage what seems like a 5 alarm? Everything is a 5 alarm fire. How do companies get to a point where they're able to have a consistent triaging system to where, hey, this one can wait, but this one cannot?
No, I think there's a communication breakdown, and that communication breakdown is between the security team and anyone who's in charge of the money, whether it's your CFO, the board, uh, CIO, CTO, whoever is in charge of saying, yes, it is important enough to the business to make this investment, or invoke this risk, whatever. And that is that security teams talk about vulnerabilities, and they talk about the problems that they're seeing. Where I think there's a giant mismatch is there is an inability to communicate that, and here is the result of that vulnerability, or here is the business impact to your risk. We have now gone from a 20% risk of being owned to an 85% risk of being owned with this vulnerability alone. And the reality is, this is a pervasive across our network ownership if we don't do something about it. And I think there's a lack of education and training around how that impact can be communicated to the person who's receiving it. Right.
Well, but if you look at it, like, let's talk about that value of that impact though, because if you look at how modern reporting structures are made, like when you look inside of a CISO organization, right? You've got a SecOps team, that's very technical, very focused on operations, right? On there's the soldiers on the front line that are
It was
fighting
a cost center.
Yeah. How do you take that out of that technical landscape and that technical lens, and you start to assign a dollar value to this? And this gets a little morbid when you get kind of down into it. But how do you break down, an incident response analyst? Here's how much an incident response analyst costs per hour to work an incident. Okay, if he has to go re-image, Jeff's computer, how much does it cost the organization to have Jeff out of pocket because his computer is getting re-imaged? What about the technicians that are that are in the outsourcing agency, whether they're help desk or WePro or HCL or whatever the case is, right? How do you value those costs? And then you have to create more. This is going to sound horrible, and I know this is probably going to be like literally an unpopular opinion when people listen to this, but you have to create more bean counters inside the cybersecurity organization. We ran into the exact same thing when we built cyber in the Air Force, right? Was we were trying to sell cyber to pilots. And pilots see bombs on target, and they see plumes of smoke, and they get that kinetic effect that that worked. Until we can speak in beans, in a better way for the CIOs and the CFOs and the CTOs and the CEOs, we're going to continue to struggle to have that conversation.
So are you almost saying that we need we need risk managers who are proprietary to cybersecurity to be able to understand the financial value of some of these things and communicate them to boards?
I think a better join between finance and risk needs to happen. I don't think that we have mastered the art of quantifying risk with enough financial impact. I've watched organizations try to do it. I've watched organizations go through exercises, but when you start to, and you've worked insurance, Matt. So, I mean, I don't know, if you've got experience doing this from the insurance side or not, but, it's hard to come through and say, well, okay, you've got a manufacturing site. This manufacturing site produces this product. Well, how many other manufacturing sites can act redundant if this manufacturing sites go down? Is this a one-off manufacturing site, or does it only get one product that then goes to support this other product? Is it key to this local economy or this type of market share? All those factors that go in that you would normally find like a disaster recovery or business continuity plan. How do you extract that financial data and then apply kind of a cyber risk control, framework on top of that, and then somehow come out with a risk framework and a quantitative dollar figure value that helps to solve that financial problem. And I've watched organizations do that, and that's hard to do.
Well, it's hard to do because no one has buy-in on applying soft dollars to a return on investment analysis. The what if factor of a breach, or what happens if we have 100 machines that are compromised, or 1,000 or 2,000. There's a soft dollar amount to that that's a lot harder to quantify, and therefore you've got procurement that doesn't take it into account, finance that doesn't take it into account, and the security teams don't really have an interest of talking about it. Right.
I'll get back to something that you'll hear me repeat. The more we do these, the more you'll hear me repeat this, because I truly do believe, like, ever since I did work, with Aon and Lloyd's over insurance and things like this, the more this just really kind of resonates with me is likelihood, right? So we've got this 5-alarm fire. If you walked into your number one company right now, Jeff, whoever that was, right, and they were to ask you point blank in the range, I want a percentage likelihood that I'm going to get hit with this, and then they want to see the math. You don't have a way to do that. There is no industry standard way to do that. There is no way to define that likelihood. And I think we can do all these quantitative and soft dollar, exercises, and we can get to a lot of really good numbers, but we go back to kind of that insurance metric, which is what is the likelihood that that's going to happen?
One of the things I find interesting about the insurance perspective, especially on soft dollars, is they're able to take a holistic viewpoint of say it's an insurance event. So in our case, let's just say a cyber attack, and one of those things that they're able to bring in is public relations, labor costs that are associated with marketing, communications, with hardware, with software, and you're able to paint a picture that's much larger than, hey, this is an IT problem, this is a network problem. So one of the things, that we really need to focus on in the cybersecurity sector is essentially showing how cybersecurity not only costs immediate money if, say, your network is hit by a ransomware, but you're also talking about the labor costs they're associated with building back trust with your clients, building back trust with your prospective employees. You're talking about sales teams that are having to spend almost years sometimes building trust with the prospects that they've been talking to every day. So really the big thing to take into account when we talk about the importance of, say, patching network vulnerabilities is what happens when we don't, and what happens when the entire business needs to shift on a dime because we didn't patch a vulnerability that is now affecting every sector of the organization.
Almost like an actuarial table for security.
Correct.
Well, that's a term I've never heard of before. I'm going to Google that one.
That's what happens when you marry security with insurance, right?
We're not married.
Right.
We're not married though. What is that?
Just dating.
So, gentlemen, our final topic today is kind of blending the cyber criminal world with the outside criminal world. British and EU officials recently disabled the encrypted communication service Encrochat. Encrochat was a service that was an encrypted messaging service used by criminal organizations that was only enabled on custom-built devices for criminals at a hefty price, and those devices had the camera, the microphone, and the GPS removed. Vice reported that French authorities were able to hack Encrochat and essentially monitor criminal organizations throughout Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. And so what's really interesting is, so we have cyber criminals and outside criminals working together. We have an encrypted chat service that only comes with an exclusive device. What do you find interesting about this? Because this seems like this is a very nuanced subject that involves an interesting hack by French authorities, and that involves a kind of interesting way to use an encrypted service that only comes with its own device.
So I think I find kind of two divergent conversations here with this one, right? There's the vulnerability, right, which we can kind of relate back to some of the previous vulnerability conversations we were just having, right? But I think there's this idea that you now have traditionally, still a military term here, right? Kinetic, criminals, right? Folks who are dealing in guns for sale, drugs, hitman type stuff, stuff that's traditionally kind of unsavory, right? Who are intentionally going out and either looking for companies like Encrochat, right, or even outsourcing to freelance hackers to build these types of privatized encrypted communications. And this isn't the first instance of this. If anybody's Vice is, I love Vice for this. As a matter of fact, I think Vice does a fantastic job of running these down. Right, is if you've ever watched their Cyber War series, I think season 2 of their Cyber War series, the very last one, actually talked about using NSO style privatized intelligence to track down cartels in Mexico. But in that same story, they also talked about how the cartels in Mexico were hiring hackers to build their own radio networks, to build their own cell networks, to build their own encrypted cell phones, to basically try to subvert some of these either state sponsored intelligence or privatized intelligence firms from trying to track down their activity. And so this is truly an evolution of those kinetic style, traditional criminal type of activities where, they're bringing in some of these hackers and these technologists, or going and finding companies like Encrochat to say, well, we're just going to continue to leverage this technology and do things on our own to try to evade law enforcement. I think that's what's what's interesting is to see that marrying of both of those worlds really kind of come together, because traditionally they were almost viewed as separate.
I'm kind of shocked that they ended up letting this information out. To be honest with you, because I mean, you take a look at they said 8,000 kilograms. It's 17,000 pounds of cocaine, right? And that's a lot of cocaine that was.
I can't tell. I can't tell if you're surprised or impressed, or you're like, I want to know how to get that much cocaine out.
No, I mean, I'm trying to quantify, like, oh my gosh, that is a lot of cocaine that they just seized because of this. But I mean, if you kind of wonder, like, if that is what hit the media of, hey, we stopped this, what didn't hit the media that was really, really interesting, right? Like, what was the reason that they said, okay, we need to come clean and let this information out, because it had to be something eminent that was big time.
Well, I think in addition to that, right, I think you hit on a key point, right, which is this is something that's been brought to the public eye. And when you look across like Silk Road, when you look across like, some of the other, pedo rings that they've taken down over the number of years for the FBI and even, National Crime Agency and things like this, what we're not, if we're not careful, we'll overlook is we should really be looking at the court documents that they release, and some of the evidentiary, stuff that they put forward in terms of what vulnerability they disclose, because this gets back kind of to our previous conversation, right? In terms of, was there a 0-day out there that nobody knew about? Was this a flaw in the encryption, which could be, if we really think doomsday scenario, right? We think five fire alarm, right? If some government agency found some flaw to some of the root encryption, of something that's kind of key to the whole internet, that could be pretty problematic for us. And so I think that's really what we have to look for as a community is, what underlying happened as part of that.
Well, it's been interesting chatting with you guys, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you next week. Thanks for joining me, and if you're listening, we look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Great talking.